Good day, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. It is the 12th of May. And there's a topic I want to talk to you about that hasn't really been talked about that much. And that is an aspect of this conflict, two aspects of this conflict that are absolutely not covered in the West. Especially in the Western dialectic of the civilized world fighting against a barbaric Russia. It's the view from the Russian side of this conflict. To begin with, for many, many Russians, at least when this started, they were looking at this as a civil war. Because Ukrainians, for the most part, are Russians. Brainwashed, absolutely been Ukrainianized, in basically a gigantic Stockholm syndrome, where millions of people begin to sympathize with a culture, the Galatian culture, that's been imposed on the rest of Ukraine, and brought the Russian culture into sacrifice. Idolic satanic sacrifice. And all these people, because humanity, their job number one, most people, is to get along, especially when they're in this audience, where everybody's steadily going more and more insane. So it becomes a group psychosis. The people with stronger wills that they left, and they left a long time ago. Many went over to the DNR, LNR, others moved to Russia, and others just fled. But most of the ones that remembered that they were Russian, they moved to Russia, or they went to the Donbass and fought there. So a lot of people like that. The rest have stayed to get, when you're running with the wolves, you need to learn how to howl. It's a Russian saying. So they learned how to howl. And after a while, they started to believe the crap that they were first faking and now actually believing about all the Ukrainian idiocy that they get taught. They're Ukrainians are, and they literally teach this crap in the schools. And a whole 2 generations now have grown up with more and more of this idiocy. One generation with total moronic idiocy in the schools. Ukrainians are the root of all people, except for Russians. We're not people, we're works. But the root of all people, particularly all white people. So all you English and French and Germans, you're all Ukrainians' minor cousins. You all broke off and you didn't evolve as far as they evolved. So you're almost at their level. Christ was Ukrainian, Hercules was Ukrainian, Muhammad was Ukrainian, hell, God is Ukrainian. Because, the Ukrainians created God. I'm sure they've got that somewhere in there. They literally believe that they dug out the Black Sea and built the Carpathian Mountains. Or was it the Caucasus Mountains? It all depends. They built the pyramids. They defeated the Persians. Basically, a fake nation with a fake history that steals everybody else's history and claims it's their own. And we laugh at that until you realize that there's a full generation. Granted, a good chunk of it has been killed off or invalided, and the rest is staged to be killed off by the narco Green Goblin. But there's a whole generation of a nation that has taken fake history to a ludicrous level, an absolutely ludicrous level. So most Russians, when this started, were looking at the Ukrainians as not as brotherly nations and all this crap. That's Soviet rhetoric. The Soviet Union took the Russian people and split them into 3 groups. They would have split them even more if they could. They probably tried. You hear people like Douglas McGregor and others. And I've got a lot of respect for the man, but when it comes to Sovietology, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't. They're like, oh, the Soviet Union was making one mass of people without any history or anything else. Wrong. The Soviet Union was making many, many new nations. And they were creating histories out of whole cloths for them, and creating languages out of whole cloths for them. I mean, and there's a lot. Or they were renaming more ancient nations into newer nations and creating whole histories. And Russians, they split into three groups. They created Ukrainians, which, for those who don't know, Ukraine, Ukraina, Krai, literally means the edge. It's the word. The word is hinterland. So they created a nation called Hinterland, full of hinterlandians. Ever heard of such a place? No. You know why? Because you cannot have a nation called hinterland. A hinterland, by its very definition, is the edge of some other land. So Kraina in Russian, there were various areas that were called Kraina in Russian at various times. For example, the Northwest, where the Russian, Finnish, Swedish borders were cultural borders. That was a Kraina, because until it got fully settled, when St. Petersburg was built and so on, because that was one of those areas that switched hands a lot and wasn't very populated, and so on and so on. That's just one example. So a lot of people, they were looking at him as, mentally deformed, not brother nation, but our own nation, Russians. And it's been done to them by the Bolsheviks in the 20s. Stalin put an end to it in the mid-30s when he realized what was exactly happening. And then it was again done. Well, Khrushchev was around. He somewhat rebirthed that because he was a Ukrainian himself, if you can call that as a nationality. And then it was done with the help of Americans, who were throwing Banderites that ran to the U.S. They were sending Banderite agents over the border since the 50s to stir up trouble. And then, after the 90s, it all started going up in scope and size. So that's how it started. But then things started popping up. Realities of what the Banderite regime, the Nazi regime, and their Western backers really are. Hospital or biolabs, the initial biolabs. There were biolabs that were overrun, like in Artyomovsk, for example, where they didn't get a chance to destroy all the evidence, paper evidence. They didn't get a chance to destroy the bodies, where there were just dozens of children that had been partitioned, if you want to put it mildly, had their organs taken out while they were alive, because you cannot harvest organs from a dead body. Necrolysis kicks in the moment the blood's not circulating. So the body has to be alive. Brain, it's optional, but body has to be alive. It has to be breathing, whether on a machine or on its own. So lots of dead children, kidnapped children, murders, civilians being murdered, and so on and so on. The POWs, there were quite a few POWs that have been returned that were castrated by so-called doctors in Ukraine. People that have been beaten, starved. There is no, I'm not even saying Geneva Convention. There's no humanity and there's no Christianity in that godforsaken land called Ukraine. It is the devil's shithole. And it's funneled and controlled directly by the temple, the satanic temple on the Potomac and on the Thames. I don't know how else to put it. Absolute satanic evil. And it transformed. It didn't, it hasn't hit everybody, but a very large percentage of the population now looks at this as a holy war. In all sense, it's a holy war. Be it Orthodox, Catholics, or Muslims. And they're all standing together against the evil, the Satanism that we see right across that border. They're attacking the church. And by the way, interesting enough, the Muslims in Russia are, for the most part, I'm not talking about the Gestarbiters. I'm talking about the Chechens, the Dagestanis. They're also in shock at the destruction of churches, and so they have a saying: "We stand with the Russians because the Russians stand with God." It's an old saying. So now we've got this, and for example, for the last 3 months, in Kursk and Belgorod Oblast, the drone operators have been specifically targeting churches, more so than other buildings, specifically destroying churches. We see what happened with the Orthodox Church, with the real Orthodox Church, the canonical church in Ukraine. You've got this cosplay fake church that is now the official nationalist church. It has no room for Christ, but it has plenty of room for the saintly nationalist Ukrainians. They draw icons of Ukrainian soldiers. Say one's murdering women and children. Yeah, real saints, the devil's saints. And the politicians have their faces put on icons and put in these fake churches. Because, they're all saintly, especially the Green Goblin and the Cheesecake King, Poroshenko, who, by the way, the narco goblin has put in jail his own backup. Poroshenko is his number one competitor out of those that are still left alive. Kolomovsky was the one he put in jail already, who was the backer of the Green Goblin. Kolomovsky, the Zhidobanderovts, as he put it himself. Zhid is a Slavic word for Jew. And it became, yes, you'll say, but Yevrei is the Russian word for Jewish, for a Jew. Yevrei is a devaluation of the word Juden, which is a German word. And Zhid became a curse word in Russian. But historically, it just means Jew. That's the Slavic word. If you look at every Slavic language, there's a variation of that word, because that's just the word for Jewish, or for a Jew. But Kolomovsky, who created created the Azov, what now is a brigade, or more, maybe a division. Actually, it's now a corps. They've created the Azov Corps. Put a bunch of other brigades under it. So, and by the way, Israel, this is an out-and-out Nazi organization created by a Jewish oligarch who has dual citizenship with Israel, and Israel has no problems with that. Oh, yeah. The Israeli government, under Mr. Netanyahu over there, a war criminal, has absolutely no problems that a citizen of Israel created and sponsored a Nazi brigade. Well, battalion at that time. Well, Nazi corps now. Of course, then again, Azov, which was labeled by the U.S. Congress as a right-wing extremist terrorist organization, then appeared in Congress 2 years ago. They were in Parliament, and Boris Johnson was holding their flag, photographs all over the place. Look it up. Look it up. To show you all the hypocritism of Western politicians in general. Everyone's equal before the law, except some people are really equal, and some people just get away with anything because they're above the law. That's how equal they are. So for many, many Russians, what we're looking at right now, and I'm, honestly speaking, I believe in this too. We are fighting Satanism. We are fighting the forces of evil. A black evil that rots the heart and rots the soul. Which then goes to the next question for all the people in Europe, non-Russian Europe, in the U.S., is whose side are you on? Are you on the side of God? Are you on the side of Christ? Or are you on the side of the devil? Because if you're aiding and assisting in this, you're on the side of the devil. And to say, well, I didn't know, is a cop-out. It's a total cop-out. It's a cop-out because it doesn't take that much to know. You only have to search a little to start seeing the truth of what this war is about and what sits on the other side. I'm talking about the Zelensky and his backer side. You really don't have to do that much digging to run across a lot of stuff. I mean, there's 30 to 50,000, nobody knows the exact number. That's the ballpark figures I've seen. Children from Ukraine that have disappeared in Europe and the US. Children's hospitals or children's homes, for orphanages, were taken out. The kids get to Germany, the kids get to Madrid, and Spain, and they disappear. They're given new identities and they're disappeared, sold off. A lot of children were kidnapped at gunpoint from people that stayed behind in towns like Bakhmut or Artyomovsk and other places. The Ukrainian white helmets, basically. They drive around and they're going to help the children get out. And they take these children at gunpoint and then disappeared. Some are harvested for organs, some are sold to pedophiles, some, I don't know. I mean, Ukraine, right off the bat, you got to look at a country that's at war. So if it means a war, that means lots of wounded soldiers. I mean, that's what war is. I mean, if we fought the war the way America or Britain or Germany or Israel fights a war, we would just exterminated all the cities. You would have plenty of much fewer wounded soldiers and hundreds of times more wounded civilians. Because that is how the West fights. It's the extermination of women and children. That's what the West gets off on. Each other's women and children, other people's women and children. I mean, that they consider it splashdown. We win. We've blown up 300-400 more kids. Woo! Aren't we cool? And yes, that's satanic. And if you support that, you're supporting Satanism. The strikes on Yemen, as an example, by the U.S. military is satanic. Because they can't hit these guys. They can't hit the actual combatants. They can't find them. So they just take it out on civilians. That is satanic. But that is the standard U.S. policy. Go read, by the way, about the million or so German POWs that died in American and British and French concentration camps in 1945, end of 1944, 1945, 1946. Oh yeah, that's going to be a shock for you if you haven't heard of this before. Go read them. Go read about it. They're kept in fields because, by the way, Eisenhower gave an order that when the U.S. military, the Western Allied militaries crossed the Rhine, no prisoners. Eisenhower, who was German, despised Germans. Go figure on that one. Talk about self-hate. But that was his order. No prisoners. The generals under his command ignored that. They took prisoners, but there was no facilities for these prisoners. Before that, America shipped POWs, German POWs, out to the U.S. For example, on the Fort Bragg Reservation, there was a big camp for German POWs. A lot of them wound up staying in the U.S. after the war. But that's a different point. So there was no preparations. There's no camps, nothing. So while they poke fingers that POWs died in Russian camps, and they did, a lot of them died from starvation because there wasn't enough food to feed the people, let alone the POWs. But the vast majority of them survived. And yes, when you say, but wait, when they were allowed to go back to Germany, only about 56,000 returned to Germany. That's right. But over 500,000 stayed in Russia. Why? Because, as my late father would tell me when he was 14 and working in a factory, he had lots of German former military working in that factory with him. They had their apartments. Some of them still slept in the barracks. They went to work in the factory during the day, and they slept in the barracks because they didn't have apartments. But others already had apartments, and a lot of them were married to local women and had kids. So when in 56 they're told, well, now you can go back to Germany, what Germany are they going to go back to? To a Germany where possibly their families are long dead or their wives are remarried. Nobody remembers them. I mean, you got to figure, by this point, for some of them, maybe 13, 14 years have passed by. They've got a wife and they've got kids here. Most men aren't going to leave what they have now for something that may be still existing. Somebody might still remember you. They're going to stay where they're at. Because for so many years, I mean, they got new families. Some of them probably, this is their first families because they were young enough when they got drafted into the Wehrmacht. And they've got wives and kids. They're not going to go anywhere. So a lot of them stayed. Over 500,000 of them stayed. And it's logical. But the U.S. murdered over 1 million Germans. Mostly they were killed by neglect. They weren't shot. They weren't hung. They were mostly killed by neglect. They were set up in fields. They froze to death. They starved to death. Dysentery killed lots. Read some of the interviews with the veterans that survived. And most of these were kids or old men. I mean, the old men died off quick. Because you got to figure on the Western Front, especially toward the end of the war, Hitler the Nazis put up whatever the hell they could grab. 15, 16-year-old kids, World War I veterans who were old, leg brigades, people flat-footed or missing a leg, on ear brigades for the deaf, and so on and so on. But with Battle of the Bulge had a bunch of those. That's when they first really started appearing. So those people were killed off. So the West has this long history of murder. But then they color it in these words of, it was all for democracy. It was for human rights. Right. Yeah. When Israel takes out 3 or 4 apartment buildings with 2,000-pound bombs hitting the base of the building to make sure they collapse to get one guy, is that also for humanity? Israel just happens to be the main one mass murdering right now. But it has the support of the West as a whole. And it's armed by the West as a whole. And the West has done the same thing. Look at Yugoslavia. Trains that were hit, slow-going trains. I remember the scandal of that, because they were showing this speed train that was going so fast that, the missile just couldn't veer off. And you look at this train, it's like 1940s train. Yeah, right, that's a speed train. And then somebody finally, a whistleblower said, they sped up the real 6-fold to show that fast train. Hospitals were hit, birthing maternity wards were hit, markets were hit, churches were hit, everything were hit. They couldn't hit the Yugoslav army, so they started murdering the Christians. Because, by the way, that's also very normal for the West. Murdering Christians is the way they go. The West has done more to de-Christianize the Middle East and a lot of other areas than all the Islamic Jihad puppets of the West could have done. That's right. Look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. Whose side are you on? Are you on God's side? Because you now hear the truth. So you can't even say, oh, I didn't know, or this, that. Well, you know. You may be willfully ignorant. But that's not really an excuse, because you've made a choice at that point to be ignorant. To say, well, I didn't know the facts. But you knew there were facts to be known. So think about it. Especially those people that say, I believe the Bible, every word of it. Well, think about it. Whose side are you on? Washington sure as hell didn't change any. Not under Trump, not on anybody. It's not going to change. It's incapable of changing. That's just what you're dealing with. Unless you're out there protesting all of this, unless you're out there making yourself heard, that you don't want these wars, you don't want Washington murdering civilians, you don't want Washington's owners murdering civilians, you don't want Washington's vassals murdering civilians, or supporting the jihadists, or supporting the Nazis in Ukraine. If you're not participating in this, then you can figure out whose side you're on. Because, there's no more ignorance. It's the same thing as when you hear the Bible and you refuse to believe it. Well, you can't go before God then afterwards and say, well, I didn't know. I didn't know Christ was king and the Son of God and God the Word, Trinity, all that. I didn't know. Well, yes, you did. You just didn't want to believe it, or you ignored it because you've heard it. Now you're hearing the truth of this. Now think about it. Think hard. So for us, it's for many of us, and myself included, this is a holy war. We're fighting for God's truth. And that's all stop. So compromising with the minions of Satan, there is no compromise with the minions of Satan. And that's what sits in the power in the West, with few exclusions. But that's what sits. That's the main countries in the West are all like that. They're satanic. And that's a thing. Think about this. You can't understand why the people do what they do. Why the leaders of these countries are taking the actions that they're taking. Because if you're thinking regular logic, you're thinking normalcy or decency, none of this makes sense. And the question is, how do they not know? Well, look, for example, Canada, and not only Canada, Netherlands, pushing assisted suicide. Suicide your way out, the government will help you. Set up a suicide day. But then you stop to think, wait a second. Why is the government pushing suicide? Hard push on suicide. Oh yeah, there's the save money factor or something else. But there's another factor. Knowing how many of these people in power are satanic. Out and out satanic. For Christians, and not only, actually for all the major monastic all the major Abrahamic religions, suicide is instant damnation. Now you're pushing, prodding, teaching people to suicide themselves. They're basically what these people are doing, these satanic leaders that are pushing this, is they're bringing sacrifices to their God, which is not our God. It's the dark God, or the fallen angel. Think about that. Just for a second, think about that. They're doing mass sacrifices. And when you look at modern art, and these shows, the same Emmys, I mean, it's pure Satanism. They're not hiding it anymore. They don't need to. And the worst part is, I'm hoping my audience here, everybody's enlightened enough to understand what I'm saying. But honestly speaking, these words of mine, I am under no illusion that I'm going to have some come to Jesus revival with most of the English-speaking understanding part of humanity that I'm making this video for. I don't need to make this video for Russians. Because most Russians already understand this. They've come to that realization. Whether they fully grasp that realization or it's a subconscious realization that starts to peek through. It's under question, because it's both, probably, depending on who you're talking to. But with Westerners, it's still this process. So, but the majority wouldn't care. They wouldn't. They are of this earth, fully, 100%. They wouldn't care. That's why the powers in the West, I mean, you can almost hear the devils laughing. The powers in the West, they don't hide this anymore. They throw it in your face. Because they know the vast majority of your fellow citizens are damned. They don't give a damn. And they'll be judged that way. They're damned. And they're quite willing and happy to take all of you with them to hell. Like a drowning man. Except the man doesn't even realize he's drowning. He doesn't care. That's why they're not even hiding. What used to be done in the shadows or whispered is out in the open and celebrated. And celebrated. This is Carthage on a gigantic level. So let's think about it. All right. I'm going to stop whacking your brains and shut up now. So, just think about the words I've said. And if it's something valuable, if you think it's valuable, let me know. Give me some feedback. A lot of people give feedback, which is good. So, God bless.